Hello everyone and welcome to His Author's Voice. And I am the author, Jack Sanger. What follows is a tale of love, but as you might guess, with a twist. I hope you enjoy it. The Actress and the Bishop. His nickname was the Bishop. Some thought it had stuck to him because, as an exceptional chess teacher, he was a kind of priest who drew the young into an almost religious zeal for the game. Others pointed out that he'd been the singer in a mildly successful pub ska band called The Congregation. A few noted his drug-dealing days when he, like Timothy Leary, handed out window-pane LSD with the benediction, "Make love, not war." Finally, his actual surname was Parish. Enough of a bait for friends to leap to the moniker the Bishop when discussing him among themselves. So, for whatever reason, the bishop he became, and would ever be. As might be conjectured from the foregoing, he was a colourful character, attracting people to him with his good Anglo-Indian looks, charm and ready wit. Whilst never out of work, he could equally be said to be never truly in it either. He lived economically on the hoof, making sudden bounty now and then, whilst eking out the pennies at other times. He was such an attractive companion that his friends supported him almost unwittingly whenever he needed it. And that's how he lived his life. He had no siblings and never had children. Thus it was that, at the white-haired, pony-tailed, heavily lined age of 85, in a commune in the Pyrenees, subsisting on a British state pension, he had only the generational tears of fellow Latter-day survivalists as family. He still had his wits, and he was well loved, it must be stressed. He taught guitar and chess to the young, managed a bit of weeding, and curated and watched films of an evening in the big room, giving introductions to the gathered clan about the background of each, its director, stars, production vicissitudes, and the like. This latter activity involved online research. It was while doing this that he came across what must be termed a life-altering discovery. He realized that only a half hour away, the star of horror films he loved in his formative early 20s and had even shown in the big room was holed up in a chateau, a virtual recluse. A few days later, after lunch, in one of the commune's beat-up Citroën Dianes, he made the journey over 2 ridges and winding, narrow roads. It was spring, a little breezy, but full of butterflies, blossom and mating birds. At last he arrived at Château Le Théâtre. The iron gates were locked, but there was a large bell housed above them on a sturdy chain. He gave it a lusty tug, and the peal echoed across the mountain slopes. A good 5 minutes later, she marched up the drive, quite athletic in a black dress, a brass telescope swinging from one hand. "Bonjour," she said quizzically. "Hello," he replied. "I'm English, like you." "Ah," she pursed her lips. "I don't give interviews." "I'm a neighbour. Well, half an hour's drive." He smiled his most attractive smile. "And a lifelong fan." "Oh." "So?" "I came on impulse. I live in a self-sufficient green commune. We have a ciné room. I showed The Lady and the Wolf only a week ago. Then I discovered where you lived. Sort of synchronicity. So what do you want? An autograph? To be friends? He ventured boldly. To be friends? She laughed. I don't collect them anymore. She raised an eyebrow. How old are you? 85. You certainly look every inch of it. I'm 90, but you would know that as a fan. Yes. With a little shrug, she started the gates unlocking. Bring your vehicle inside. We can drive to the house. He parked on the circle of shale before the chateau. He noted that though it looked a little shabby, it was well maintained. The dozen or so south-facing windows were painted and secure. Then he followed her grey bun and steady walk into the building. The big oak doors were wide open. The tiled hall would have been dark and unwelcoming otherwise, but with the late sun entering, it seemed almost welcoming. He smiled to himself. Georgia Jones, the one and only, here, 2 steps before him. She led them into the kitchen. A young woman in jeans, various facial rings, and a much-ribboned ponytail was busy at the stove. Un extra pour le dîner, she said decisively. Madame, the young woman nodded. Come. What's your name, Mr.? She turned away. Joe Parrish. I'll show you what you no doubt are desperate to see, though you would only know that in retrospect. They made their way down the hall to a large room at the rear. It was pitch black until she pressed a switch. What she revealed was a small cinema with blackout curtains, a large projector and screen, shelves of film canisters, lurid film posters covering the walls, an Oscar statue, and 2 well-upholstered seats for viewing. How amazing, he purred. Absolutely fantastic. No photographs, she cut in as his hand reached down to his pocket. We will have supper and then we will watch something together. He stared round one last time at all the semi-clothed images of her with her name, Georgia Jones, displayed in huge, mostly blood-red font across them. He knew instantly what he would choose if she'd allow it. The Antichrist's Apostle, where she played a young, headstrong amateur detective convinced that an undead was causing the disappearance of young women. Scenes from that film unrolled patchily through his mind as he followed her back into the kitchen. Then he adjusted. At the room's centre was a bleached wood table laid for 3. They ate the lamb stew slowly, and he entertained the women with stories of life in the commune. His French was hesitant as he groped for words and phrases, but Gabby, the young woman, seemed highly amused by his Englishness and the bohemian, agrarian culture of his fellow residents. After cheese and coffee, he helped clear away and wash and dry the dishes. Georgia had left them to it with a nod of approval at Joe. Finally, everything to her liking and duties over for the day, Gabby left for home, and they were alone to go into the cinema. I'm amazed you live alone at 90, he said. I need folks around me, though, if I may say so, you look no more than 60. Oh, it used to be so different. This house was a hive when my parents were still kicking. It pulsed with the living dead, as my father termed it. Actors, writers, producers, you name it. But when I stepped off the set for the last time, all that ended. When was that? She'd moved over to the shelves of film. 41 I was, so 59 years ago. We just finished that stinker, ruler of the underworld. He didn't say anything, but he thought, 59 years of loneliness, or at least aloneness. But the way she said it, it seemed as though it was recent in her memory. I knew I was past it after that heap of dross. The director, Hal Gray, told me as much, the bastard. You're too old to be a victim, dearie, and you can't do character for shit. Cut and run while the world still loves you. He was an arsehole. Observing her up close, she still boasted her famed, chiselled Queen of Horror beauty through her finely stretched skin. The blue eyes weren't cloudy. She was very upright. You've done well to... He tried to find the words. What, stay sane? Keep my marbles? Look good? She pulled down a canister. Sorry. Sounded a bit oafish, he murmured. He'd actually only been trying to refer to her physical, not her mental state, but he said nothing. I watch my movies. Oh. It sounded even more to Joe like a recipe for insanity. I see what you're thinking. Madness, yes? Not at all. I enter my films. In my mind, I return to the age I was when I acted in them. Like this one, for example. She holds up a canister. He sees the title, Dance of the Devil. I learned quite quickly to leave behind this house in the hills, this reclusive life. I reanimate an earlier self. I remember how we made the films, learning the lines, all the takes, the sets, the locations, the editing, the drama of the interactions, the nudity in front of all those Draculas, cameramen, makeup, clapper boys, the lot. And then the emotions, the screaming, the clutching of the throat, the wide eyes, the heavy breathing, my co-star's hands groping. You can imagine. Every film is a bubble full of its own unique recipe for good or ill. Sounds terrifying. I was brought up in it. Film genes, always on location with my parents. Even as a baby I was on set. They wrote me into scripts I had to pay my way. Always beautiful, always the centre of attention. I never knew anything but adoration. I was a cipher. I existed as a beautifully packaged celluloid product. I didn't know anything else. And I loved it. But then it all ended. Except it didn't. I have credits in over 100 films one way or another, and they're all here around us now. As I said, I learned to spend my evenings reliving those couple of 100 intense hours of my life. I never tire of it. It is what I am. All that I am. Bizarrely, you might think, it keeps me young. I never see myself as older than 41. I expect you noticed that there are no mirrors in the chateau? He hadn't. She put down the canister and then wandered around the room, lighting scented candles. He followed her sure-fingered threading of the film onto the projector and adjusting the gate. When all was ready, she pointed to the upholstered seat. He sat down. She switched off the lights, started the credits rolling, and settled beside him. He loved it. The whole sensual immersion of it, the blood and gore, the screams, the thick incensed air, the beautiful star sitting beside him, her shoulder brushing his, the occasional glance at her intense face, her mouth moving, miming the words of the actors, looking, he thought, curiously younger. a carbon copy of the Georgia Jones they were watching on screen. It was as though through his entire life he'd been holding his breath for this singular event. They hardly spoke afterwards, but something had been settled between them. He took his leave of the house and drove her down to the gate. Then, as he prepared to turn on the ignition to leave, she leant through his open window. "I'll send a car to pick you up with your things tomorrow afternoon. I think we'll start by watching The Antichrist's Apostle. What do you say?" He nodded and smiled. "Perfect," he said, starting the car again. As he drove away, he caught sight of his beaming face in the rear-view mirror. "Do you know," he thought, "it may be just a trick of the light, but I seem to be looking a lot younger." Then he twisted the mirror out of view. Well, there we have it. The Actress and the Bishop. I hope you liked it. Curiously, the motive is one that I've blogged about in the past and even wrote a song about. To wit, how the stars of the silver screen never age. And it is even possible to fall in love with them 100 years later. Well, this story is a little different, but the notion of staying forever young is the same. If you like my dip into the brand tub of love, another story might appeal to you on this channel. It's called The Magic Lute. But there are a number of genres to be had: horror, sci-fi, social drama, dark and light. If you'd like to read my tales, long and short, plus poetry and Zen non-fiction, then you can go to my website, www.jacksanger.com, and download for free or make a donation. So the last thing to think about is click the subscribe button. The more that subscribe, the better as far as YouTube are concerned. And I hope you pass on the link to your friends. In the meantime, bye for now. Go in peace. Bye-bye.